Welcome to and also Season 2, Episode 5, where Kirk and I talk about the previous week's sermon at Faith Alliance Church. Kirk and I, being Kirk and John, talk about the previous week's sermon at Faith Alliance Church. But we are in the middle of Holy Week. Happy Holy Week to you.
And to you. And, I mean, not quite the middle. It's almost the middle.
I guess true. It's early middle.
Early middle.
Early middle Holy Week. Happy early middle Holy Week.
That's right. It's Tuesday. I suppose that counts as early middle.
It's early. Well, it's so it's not Monday, Thursday Eve, which would be Wednesday. But we are in Monday, Thursday Eve, I suppose.
What does one do when they're monding?
I don't know. That's a good question. That's we can discover that today. That could be our, because we are here to talk about all things
right in
Holy
the notes
Week.
below.
Yeah, right.
How you mond.
What does it mean?
What have you been doing while monding? How do you mond at your house?
What does monding look like? But we will be talking about, so we talked about Palm Sunday this past week and looked at the text, the triumphal entry. Easter Sunday, we'll be looking at the resurrection text. Good Friday, looking at Jesus' death on the cross. So really the idea is in our floating Holy Week, wherever we find ourselves within Holy Week, I thought it'd be good for us to talk about Holy Week. But let's start with triumphal entry, maybe work our way through. We've already referenced Monday, Thursday. I mean, how great is that?
But I'm sure everyone's thinking to themselves, boy, Monday, Thursday, that is great.
What kind of Holy Week podcast is it if it's not if we don't talk about Monday,
if
Thursday?
Don't bring up Monday, Thursday.
This is the niche of all niches of podcasts.
It's the one where everyone rushes out to church to mond.
I'm going to mond.
Yeah,
But going back to Palm Sunday, that's the kickoff of Holy Week. How do you respond to Palm Sunday? Reflect on Palm Sunday for a little bit as a gateway and entrance into Holy Week.
So we have discussed the triumphal entry previous.
Yes, we have.
On
that's
a
true.
previous podcast.
Yes.
To be mentioned in notes at some other time.
Yes.
But I thought about it in a slightly different way this time around. When you had brought it up, and like I had told you, it kind of kicked off with the idea of being fitted for the donkey.
Yes.
Now that isn't really where my mind was going with this, but that was just the thought of that is just really funny to me. What size donkey do you usually take? There's a lot actually about the use of that colt that's really significant.
I think so. Yeah, I agree.
So, I mean, you had talked about other triumphal entries and, arcs that people would march through and what it would look like for a triumphal entry into a city or so and so. Right? War horses.
Yeah.
Out in front, pulling chariots, people cheering, flags and garments lining the streets, maybe palm branches also, because that's what happened here. But those horses are trained.
The war horses.
They're trained.
Yeah.
To respond to somebody pulling on reins.
Oh, yeah.
They've been around people. They understand how that works. So, is it a more powerful symbol in an agrarian society to show that you are not pulling reins?
Wow. Yeah.
But colt is going where you want it to.
Without forcing it.
Fighting you. No one's pulling this colt through town. He sat on it and went.
And it wouldn't be, and you're right, it wouldn't, not only that, it wouldn't be trained to go anywhere anyway.
It would be clear to the people who saw it that that's shocking.
Yes. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, I was thinking too about the colt and the fact that Jesus, so theoretically, now the colt does apply to a prophecy in Zechariah, right? So so that does fit prophetically. But however, if you're looking for symbolism, Jesus walking through, if he would have foregone the cult, entirely, walked through as a triumphal entry, he would have subverted the war horse idea by just not riding a war horse in the first place, right? He's just coming in. Zoop. I think theoretically, you could make the same symbolic gesture by walking through Jerusalem without the horse. So you don't have the horse. People would have expected the horse. Jesus walks through Jerusalem without the horse. Same thing. He's saying, I don't need the horse to show that I'm king. But using the colt is like it's like even more. It's like even a bigger twist on just showing how unlike. He's not just saying I'm not without the horse. I'm the complete opposite. I'm on this colt that's never been ridden, an untrained baby donkey, and I think there's
Which are known for their compliance.
yes, yes, of course. Well, and I was thinking too, like, I still don't think I have a good conclusion on this, and there may not be one. Although I think what we're talking about is on the money for this idea is that there's a lot, and I mentioned this on Sunday, but there's a lot of the donkey gets a lot of real estate in that passage. Like if you read the passage, just look at the way that Jesus is directing them, what he tells them, make sure that you say this, make sure you go here. If they ask this, say that. But it's not that he had the conversation, it's that it got recorded and placed in the Gospels. Right, that part of it. So that was obviously very important. And then he zooms through Jerusalem. And I'm like, why is there so much on this one conversation? And why is there so much emphasis on this donkey? But because I think it's because of what you said. You're right. It's just it's that is the crux of the symbolism of the lack of that he's not coming in to utilize power and manipulate power. He's coming in peacefully on a donkey. But even the idea of being able to ride a colt without reins, like he's not having to manipulate on his own. The donkey's just doing it. I don't know. There's a lot to be said.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing. The other part that made me, it just kind of hit me upside the head for the first time, and I think it was when other John was reading the scripture prior to getting up for the sermon part, where he mentioned how quickly the crowd turned, and I was thinking about like why would the crowd turn? And then Jesus' line about if they don't, the rocks will cry out. Right?
Oh.
These stones will cry out. Why would the stones cry out? What was the purpose of all this? And the purpose, I was thinking about it. This is just me ruminating on the idea. I stopped to wonder about. Wait a minute. All these other times, Jesus. I mean, it's only in the span of 3 years, but in the span of 3 years, Jesus has been wandering the country, top to bottom, or top to middle, really, where he is interacting with other Romans, right? There are Romans there who talk to him and ask him for favors, right? There are church officials, synagogue officials and temple officials who try to entrap him, and he calls out the hypocrisy and just disassembles the trap every time, right? Yeah. This moment is the only reason that triggers the crucifixion.
Huh.
This moment is the moment that flies in the face of the Roman authority.
Yes.
And which is why the synagogue leaders, right, that come out and say, "Hey, keep your people quiet."
Yeah.
Because it's gonna get too much attention, and the purpose is attention. The purpose is attention in order to trigger the crucifixion, because there is nothing else they could pin on him.
Interesting, because in the triumphal entry, he is making proclamation of a triumphant king, but then even to the Pharisees, he says even the stones will cry out, meaning that even the created order is responding to
this needs to happen.
Right.
I know, as much as I don't want it, it has to happen.
Yeah.
But this has to happen. And in order for this to be successful, the one thing that's going to make the to remain sinless but trigger the death penalty is to come in as king.
Right. Right. Yeah. To proclaim like lordship Caesar as yeah.
So to be proclaimed king by a crowd, voluntary or involuntary, they're making noise.
Right.
A lot of it. A frightening amount, apparently. Which, consider for a minute, you're talking about a metropolitan area that's quite large, right? It's a city. There's a lot going on. There's people selling things.
That's true, yeah.
There's a lot of noise from people building things. There's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
If people coming down the Mount of Olives toward Jerusalem made enough noise to frighten temple officials and the Romans, it's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
It's a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And it's enough noise to catch attention and make them plot.
So it's interesting then too, because I was thinking about Jesus' and I mentioned this on Sunday. Jesus is coming in, and then post triumphal entry, he cries out to Jerusalem, "How I've longed to gather you as my hand."
Yeah.
You know, so his mind is not in like, "Oh, this is such a great day. This is such a great celebration." He's looking at the cross because
he's looking at the cross.
And you're right. This is what triggers that event. So, you know, it's interesting to come from Palm Sunday, moving into, you know, middle week, Holy Week, but we're moving toward Good Friday. I mean, that's the real next stop, and we have Monday, Thursday, the Passover, but really, you know, Good Friday, and so I think about the high of Palm Sunday, which is really a perception of celebration. Because it's really not. Jesus isn't celebrating.
Jesus isn't celebrating.
He's making a declaration about who he is. Jesus is Lord. You're right, that he is King.
Because he's not high-fiving people.
No,
and he's not saying thanks. He's cruising in.
Right, because and he knows where he's going, and he knows what this event means. He probably knows that the crowd's going to turn on him. I mean, like he knows all. You know, so I was just thinking about the high of Palm Sunday and then the low of Good Friday. In the middle of that, like, how do we, like, so now we're removed from the events, but we're still, you know, in the church calendar trying to memorialize, reflect on. That's part of what there's a devotional sense even in what I think we're trying to do, and trying to understand the events so that we can live out the events in our time, but. You know, how do we, as in our day, move from the high of Palm Sunday, understanding that Jesus didn't approach it that way, to the low of Good Friday? What's the Holy Week trajectory?
A different way to look at it all, I think, is coming into Palm Sunday is the announcement, right? So going back to his birth. The announcement.
Yeah.
To shepherds, noisy, right? There's noise where people are gonna know, right? This is gonna happen, and then we get to this moment, the triumphal entry, which is noisy, above the other noise of daily life in the city.
Yeah.
Attention will be drawn, right? So. We start there, and I think that trigger point to create the thought of how do we get rid of this guy.
Yeah.
And then when we get to Good Friday, you know, being put in prison, being accused by the Sanhedrin, being beat up by Roman soldiers, you know, and crown of thorns and all that. That's to try to dissuade him from going through with it.
Right.
Until finally it's terminal.
Yeah.
They want Barabbas. right? So the fact that the Romans are happy to get rid of one of these two troublemakers who's trying to overthrow the government, they're just like, which one do you want?
Yeah. We'll give you one.
We'll give you one. We'll
Yeah.
get him again. You know.
Right. Yeah.
You guys don't run that fast, so yeah, we'll get one of you. But that's to go in being cheered in to face the inevitable or the prophesied just awfulness that you have to get through to still commit to the death on the cross. That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's an unbelievable level of determination.
Yeah. There's a writer named Simone Weil that I referenced in a video I did earlier, and I really like her. And I was just looking at some of her quotes, and she said about idolatry, and then she said the reason that she says, I'm paraphrasing, the reason that we need help is out of our own idolatry is because we don't have the divine patience in order to persevere. Basically, she's like, we're not able to. You know, I've looked at, you look at Jesus' death and resurrection, you're like, well, in the atonement comes in the death and resurrection, of course. But there's still something to be said about his ability to persevere. Like, you know, we don't have divine patience to persevere like he was able just to, like, think about having to persevere not only through, just kind of what you're saying, not only through, the cross, like, you know, unbearable, excruciating, literally, but like also just the betrayal of Judas, the betrayal of wanting Barabbas over Jesus. Just like there's all these things along the way that are just terrible. That he has the divine patience to be able to endure something that to keep going that we don't. And so like even couching Palm Sunday, and that idea of like him walking through Jerusalem, being like, okay, this is not a point of celebration for him. This is a point of divine patience. Of him having to persevere as a declared king, persevere now through that, knowing what's to come. That like this week is an unbelievable test in endurance and patience for Jesus. You're right. That's a really good point.
Like you look at even now, right? Ultra marathon runners. think about that, right? The people who are doing 100 miles at a go.
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
100 miles. That takes some serious just willpower.
Yeah.
Really heavy duty. No one's shoving crown of thorns on their head or flogging them while they're doing it.
Right. Yeah.
But they're that's still a lot.
It's
a lot. Right?
It's about 99 miles more than I'd like to run. Yeah.
So that's human beings can get pretty far.
Right. Yeah.
On willpower, but all the way unto even knowing what the end is.
Yeah.
Knowing how hard that death is.
Yeah.
To keep going to that.
Yeah.
Only because the understanding is what happens on the other side of it.
Right. Even Romans, Paul says in Romans, he's like, sometimes, paraphrasing, of course, but like sometimes someone will die for a good man.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But it's like but no one dies for people they don't know. No one dies for the sinners. No one, and I like that. I'm like, but Jesus endured the cross, scorning its shame, Hebrews, but still was able to like. I think the benefit of Holy Week, and one of the things that I think you're pointing to, if I'm reading this right, is that it allows us, in some ways, real time. Like we know Palm Sunday happened. We know Good Friday. We know the time frames are lit up, but we know the time the time frames are somewhat accurate. So we know that there was 3 days. We know, and so we can in real time, to a degree, kind of walk through the week, reflecting on the divine endurance and patience of Jesus, to even be able to walk through that. Because I like your long distance, your ultra marathon analogy. It's just like those guys are crazy. Those guys they're nuts, and they have more endurance than I could ever think of. And like that's superhuman in its feat, but it's not.
But it's still
not
human.
far enough. But it's still human, right? And so like all props to anybody who can do that, but it's still not as far as it needs to go. And this week is the extent to which Jesus was patiently enduring, even before he gets arrested and tortured. All the stuff that's happening before that, that's just terrible. That he's patiently enduring.
And remembering that divine nature, but still a physical
Still,
body.
yeah.
So, some people can take pretty good knocks, but to get beat up, whipped,
Yeah.
and, mocked, spat upon,
Betrayed.
betrayed, like heartbreaking betrayal.
Yeah.
Knowing that heartbreaking betrayal's there and telling him, go ahead, right?
Right. Yes.
That's just,
Yes.
that's rough.
Yeah.
Or an acceptance of it, this is part of that,
Right.
what this costs, right?
But still understanding, to your point about being human, that he's still feeling we know he's feeling all those things because of Gethsemane, where he says,
Yeah.
if there's any other way, take this from me, but not my will, your will be done. So we know he's heaped with the emotional. This is before his arrest. It's before he's been touched. He's dealing with the emotional difficulty of what's happened previous and the decision before him, both in
The stress to sweat blood.
right. And so his body, his physical fleshly body, is dealing with all of this stuff, and he's still able to endure. And so it's not just the arrest, beating, death, that he has to endure. I think even starting at Palm Sunday, there's a lot to be said about, okay, this is the patient, divine endurance of Jesus through this week that's worthwhile reflecting on. I usually like to Holy Saturday when in between Jesus' death and resurrection. I like that day because to me it's just reflecting on the this is the only day where God has been silent, right? That God is that there's a silence in this, and it's a solemn reflection. But I like Holy Saturday for that reason. But this I like now as we're talking, like thinking about the patient endurance of Jesus to keep going, even though we know he wanted to stop. He said it.
But willing to take it.
But willing to go for it. Yeah. Not begrudging, but willing. Yeah. So maybe Holy Week becomes our ability to reflect on that, the willingness of Jesus to keep going.
Through unbelievable, horrible things.
Yeah.
It is pretty amazing. And then, Holy Saturday. That is a really strange period in history.
I think so.
So for that moment, the world wonders, now what? Right? So there were the disciples, the 12 that we consider, right? And except for now Judas has jumped ship.
Yep.
And the Potter's Field and so on. So we're down to 11 of the disciples.
Yeah.
Mary Magdalene and the sisters.
Yeah.
And then, of the throngs that were there to cheer him on, or the people that had been healed and had direct connection, all of them now are holding their breath going, oh no.
They are because they all go back to, some of them go back to what they were doing. That so Saturday. You can imagine the Saturday. Well, it's Sabbath. But they're like, what? Now what?
Now what?
They're in their minds. It's over. Because even after Sabbath, when they go to and in our resurrection narrative, but after Sabbath for them, they go to anoint the body for the first time because they couldn't during Sabbath, of course. And they were going to anoint the body not because they hoped that it had been resurrected,
but because that's
just
courtesy to the process.
That's just what you do. Yeah, it's part of the process of embalming a body.
Yeah.
So they had no thought of resurrection at that point. They just thought it was over. And so there's a sense of like, like, to me, Holy Saturday is it's just an opportunity not to think about the what ifs of like, but to think about the silence of God in that there's a it's we know I like to take it as it is without thinking about Sunday in a sense, because I like to think about the sense of like, for the disciples, for Mary Magdalene, this is like they were hopeless. They're without hope at this point.
They
And
locked
what would that
themselves
be
in
like?
the upper room, right?
Right, for fear of being killed, because they had sided with Jesus, who's now dead. And then, which to me makes the shock of resurrection all the better. When I think like, oh man, what would it look like for him just to show up?
But still, my favorite part of that story is them thinking he's the gardener. So we've been with him for 3 years,
That is what.
day and night, through all kinds of things. We saw him get crucified, and we were there, and then we scattered. Boy, we sure do miss him. What did he look like? I can't remember. I don't know. That's the gardener.
He kind of looks like this gardener over here, but not really.
I love that moment.
Yeah.
Hey, dude. No. That must have been funny
It's
for
like-
Jesus. So,
It shakes
you
his
guys.
Is it like when you run into somebody out of context?
Yeah.
And you never see, like you see them in a grocery store, and you have a teacher, and you only see them at school, and then all of a sudden they're like in the real world, and you're like, wait a second, I've never seen you in that place before. What?
Completely out of context.
Yeah.
I just love that moment. That is a great moment. But yeah, suddenly appearing in a room. What?
Yeah, I didn't know. I was not expecting this.
Especially after Thomas's comment.
Yeah.
You know, if you're gonna say dumb things, don't say it about the Lord of the universe.
Unless I put my hand. It is funny because Jesus is like, all right, let's go for it.
Okay, funny guy. Here you go. Yes, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't care. That's
How about that?
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Well, I would say for us for Holy Week, I think that for me anyway, even as we wrap this up, just realizing to your point is what you're saying. Unless I got it completely wrong, which then we'd have to record a whole other podcast.
Yeah, let's start over.
I misinterpreted you entirely. The idea of the patient endurance of Jesus through this week, that we can track in to some degree real time, and I think I like that for even on this early. We're recording this on Tuesday, so for us, the podcast will go out on Friday, in good time for Good Friday. But even to reflect on the endurance of Jesus, I think the patient endurance of Jesus throughout this whole week, starting at Palm Sunday.
And even there's one little piece in the middle too that I think is super sweet. So we tick off the Romans and the synagogue and the temple officials, and then we go with the closest people and celebrate a holiday tradition, right?
Yeah.
One last time
Yeah.
to get together and celebrate Passover, and then now we can go.
Yeah.
And the washing of the feet and the whole deal. I mean, that's just so amazing.
Yeah.
To get one last shot at that, at something so personally significant, right? Because it's a holiday.
Yeah.
All of us have a holiday that we enjoy, right? And you want to do. People live to a holiday if they're dying, right? So that's a common thing.
That's true.
Right,
So
so-
Jesus, yeah, that's true. That's good.
So this is one last time,
Yeah.
that you get to celebrate this before I go.
Yeah. That's good. You're right. That he honored that tradition. That was part of
And made it bigger.
and gave it new meaning. Yeah, that's true. That's good. Well, I think we have figured out Holy Week entirely.
Yeah, we're done. That was
That's it.
Christianity,
Okay.
everybody. See ya.
Well, I hope we've given a little bit of maybe some punctuation to Holy Week. It's helped me to talk through some of these things. But we'll be back in a couple of weeks to continue back with Romans. And we'll see you then. Thank you for Holy Week conversation.
Hey, thanks for having me.